Hey everyone, we are back with another chess video, and today I have a very nice topic which, I am pretty happy to, concisely put into a video, because quite frankly, this principle I'm about to share took me at least a year to learn myself, perhaps even longer, and I might even still struggle with this a bit right now. So it's a very powerful concept that is very important, and basically that is do not be trading. It sounds very simple. Most people, when they approach this, they think of it in terms of pawn tension or don't trade pieces because you want to maintain the tension. And yes, that is true, but this is much deeper than that. And this is exponentially true when you are playing a very tough player. And so, what exactly am I talking about? Well, what I'm referring to is in chess, whenever you're, of course, up material, you of course want to trade, and that is generally a good idea, especially trading pieces because of course in the end game, you're going to have more strength than your opponent, and you're simplifying the position into something that in theory you have a much better chance at winning. Now, the one problem with this is when people take this one principle too far, and what they end up doing is, especially against higher rated players, say maybe you're rated 1,000, your opponent is rated like 1,500, and you're playing them, you take this to the extreme even if material is equal, and you start thinking, well, I need to trade queens because maybe their queen is more powerful than mine because they're 1,500, they know how to use it. And, the problem there is you're simplifying a bunch, and the hope is that maybe you can salvage a draw, or you can simplify the position where they don't have anything, or maybe you'll get lucky in the end game. But quite frankly, that's not true, because what's going to happen is the higher rated player, regardless of the rating, they're higher rated for a reason. They know what end games are good for them, and they'll only trade into end games that are winning for them. So it's really a big beginner mistake to be trying to trade down. If they're bad with knights, they try and trade off their knights. If they don't know how to use their queen too well, they try and offer a queen trade very early in the game. And in my case, it wasn't that severe. In my case, what happened was, personally, endgames was a strength of mine. And so what I would do is I would over excessively trade down because I thought I had the confidence to convert those endgames. And I probably would have learned sooner if it wasn't for the fact that it worked. But the problem is, long term, this holds you back because I'm giving up parts of my advantage. So this is what we're going to convey here today. So let me give an example here of one game where I gave away a pretty good chunk of my advantage, and you'll kind of see this concept come up over and over in some of the examples I'll show. So in this game, my opponent was a bit higher rated. This game was played a while ago. So let's get to the start. This isn't going over the whole game. So this is the position that we want to look at. So in this position, I am up by 1 point of material. And of course, with the mindset that I just said, generally I want to be trading down. And, taking this a bit too far is when it becomes a problem. Because yes, you do want to simplify, but you don't want to go out of your way to such an extent that you give away a big part of your advantage in trying to simplify. Now, of course, by material, we're only up by 1, which doesn't sound much. If we take a look at the evaluation here, this eval bar is like +6, so this is really big advantage for white. Black's king is pretty open. White's king isn't ideal either, but, this king is just really in the open, and, it's just simply not going to survive any kind of attack that we have. So what's the first step? Well, a very logical move, which is a good move, is we want to attack this open king, and maybe we can even trade pieces. This is fine. And so bishop to e5 check is a good move, and that's what I played, and this is okay. This is logical, it makes sense. But we can see how this principle is going to very shortly go a bit too far, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So of course they moved their king, which is okay, fine. They don't want to trade because they're down material. And so what am I going to do? Well, of course I'm going to want to take their bishop because I'm up material. And that's an okay move. This is fine so far. They recapture with the pawn. But now we start to see kind of where this going too far concept comes into play. Because here, what I actually did was I thought, well, I've already traded this. I don't really want to play here because, yeah, I'll get the queens off, but I'll double my pawns. And, then my extra pawn isn't really worth much. I'm only up 1 pawn. I don't want to have double g-pawns. So how else can I start forcing more trades? Well, move that appealed to me back then was knight to f5. And these are the kind of mistakes that I would make constantly in my games for years, because I think I'm attacking the queens, this is a good tempo move, and is basically forcing them to trade knights. And so, if I can trade more and more pieces, this is, of course, going to be good for me. Now, the problem is, as in the game, I did play knight f5. We can look down the evaluation here. We went from +6 to less than +2. We are plus 1.9 here, according to this. So we've lost a big part of our advantage. Now, why is that? Well, here's the thing. The best move in the position, according to the Stockfish, is queen to f1. And it's a very simple move. We want to keep queens on the board, and we stop any kind of checks. And quite simply, we're threatening queen to f7, or any kind of ideas where our queen inches closer to their king. And, if they try and defend the f7 square, maybe something like queen to h5, then we just go queen to f6, and our pieces are getting closer and closer to their king. Their king is just so exposed that we want to be constantly putting pressure on their king. In this case, we're even attacking this knight. And so we can see the evaluations already up to +11. White is extremely good here. However, why is this the case? Why do we want to keep queens on the board here? So if we were to go back, the reason we want queens on the board is we have to look at king safety. Whose king is more exposed? Well, their king is very dangerously exposed. Mine isn't ideal here, but I have some pieces nearby. I can try and defend. And, they have no immediate checks right now that, wouldn't lose material. So really, white's king is fairly safe. Black's king is not. If their king is not safe, one strategy to win is to try and trade into an endgame. But the other strategy is to keep the pressure, keep attacking. And that means keeping attackers on the board, even though I'm up by one pawn. It's much stronger to keep the most powerful attacker, the queen, on the board. And in this case, queen f1 is a very good idea of this principle. But, in me, thinking I want to trade down constantly, I play a trading move, which, white is still winning, but we can see the evaluation drop pretty big. Now we're only, less than +2. So it's a big problem that I played here. But okay, not seeing that, of course, they trade, I take back. In the game, I'm happy with this. They go queen to g5, and it looks solid. Now, again, the mindset goes a bit too far. I'm still in the mindset of trying to trade down. And like I said, this is exponentially bad. It's a losing strategy, especially against winning players, who are very high rated. And so here, how do I trade pieces? Well, I would like to attack their king. That's still open. I knew that. And so I play, I'll play bishop to e6 check. It attacks their king, and it provokes them to trade the knight, which again is trading pieces. And I thought I'm getting closer to an endgame. But as we can see by the evaluation, white's advantage keeps dropping. Now I'm only a 1.4 advantage. Now, similarly to before, we were best by keeping the queens on the board. Queen to f3 was the best move here. We just defend the bishop. They attack it, we defend it. And we still keep our attackers on the board. But I wasn't thinking that way back then. So I did play bishop to e6. They just moved their king. Okay. Now I play queen f3. And, okay, so they trade now. I recapture. They play queen to e5, threatening any kind of check on e1 as well as my pawn. And so, again, thinking, well, I'm up material. I don't mind trading a pawn. I can trade away that e6 pawn. I'll take this pawn with check. And it's like, okay, white is better. And so now I'll keep attacking. I'm up by 2 pawns now. I must be really good. I'm really happy with the position. Sure. Well, this is where it gets so tricky because, I'm up by 2, but how am I converting this? It's not actually so simple. What could happen is like king to g5, which did happen. And then I can give a check, and they can come back. But what am I going to do? Am I going to keep repeating? Do I have a follow-up here? How do I make progress? And so what I played was, of course, trading down. I'm up by 2. I want to trade. So I go queen to h8. And if I can get the queens off the board, that must be good. But of course, as we can see from the evaluation, we've dropped from over +6 to now we're only half a pawn advantage. And when they take my e-pawn, okay, fine, I'm up by 1. I'm still winning here. Well, I trade queens, thinking I'm happy here. They recapture. And very dismal, we can see the evaluation is exactly equal. I was +6, and I've literally traded away my advantage in this game. Which is crazy to think that that one concept has made this game already equal. Now, how did we get to equal, and what could we have done? Well, we got to this equal position because I kept slowly giving away my advantage when I should have been keeping pieces on the board, despite the fact that I was up by a little bit of material. Trading was, quite frankly, the wrong plan in this type of position. Now, what should I have done? Well, instead of trading down, here, when they played this way, yeah, I probably should have just gone queen to f7. And if they were to go king to g5, I think I just keep pushing the pawn. And the point is, I want to keep queens on the board. I know it looks scary because my king is a bit exposed, but if they give a check, my king can come up, they can give a check again, I can actually play g3. And, my king is safe enough. They can try and check me again, I can move back, they can, check here. Obviously they can't go here because I take it with my queen, so don't forget the f1 is still defended. And so now I can come up, king to g2. And if they want to try and, keep checking me, well, I can block the check. And, if they want to take my pawn, that's fine. I'm still up in material. And, we can still see it from the evaluation that, we're up over +2 here. It's, it's like 2.5, 2.53 according to the deeper depth of Stockfish. So, this is still winning for white, and we're still pushing for a win. Now, again, don't be greedy to try and only get back pawns and keep our +2 advantage. Keep in mind, we have mating net ideas. We might have a check here. We might push these pawns. We have to be very systematic about this, but at least white is pushing for a win. They're still on the attacking side. Now, in the game, that didn't happen, because, of course, I gave this check. I traded queens, and now we're equal. And so, okay, this is a bit frustrating, but all right. So, of course, I'm going to get my king active in the endgame. They play king to e4, which is fine. The game is still holding here. And now, of course, I'm a bit worried with this pawn. I want to try and get to d1. And so how do I get to d1? Well, maybe I can keep moving my king further over here and stop this pawn, and maybe we're still holding. We are up a pawn after all, not knowing the evaluation is dead equal, of course, in a real game. And so I play king to f1. And now we can see from the evaluation that, this is now -6. We went from completely winning to now completely losing. Now it's, -7 here. And so, unfortunately, we've basically blown this game. Now, what should we have done? Well, here, the problem was I needed to keep their king out. And so, actually, king to f2 is correct. And this would be holding the draw with really exact play. But there's many places to go wrong. So, a long line, just to kind of show a sample of how this would be drawn, is Stockfish. These are just their top moves here of how the end game might go, where we're pushing these pawns and we're trying to trade everything off. And eventually, we'll get to this thing where exactly at the right moment, we both queen, and this is with check, but once they move, we just keep shuffling. And we both have a queen, but it's a dead equal draw. They can move, but, it's still a draw. There's so many checks. No side has a skewer. This is dead equal here. And, the problem was, here, because I didn't play this, I was slowly giving away my advantage. And then, very logically, just one small move is all it takes. And now I'm completely losing. And my opponent actually didn't really play perfect from here, but they played well enough to win. They had the right plan. They escort their king, have their king escort their pawn. They kept advancing here. I push, but this pawn with d3 is just so strong, it's going to promote way sooner than I am. And my opponent ended up winning this game. But it's a good instructional moment that it took me at least a year, maybe more, to fully understand the concept that this pattern would come up over and over in my games where I would have a really big advantage. Not necessarily +6 like in this game, but I would have a big advantage, +1, +2. And, you struggle the entire game to get these little minute details and small edges. It doesn't make sense to then blow it in a game when you just give up, by that advantage by trading too many pieces. And it's not always the queen, but it's just the fact that you have to be careful and very selective. Do you want to trade down? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes no. But you have to think it through. You can't just say, I'm up material, let's trade. That's a losing idea, especially against higher rated players who know what endgames are better for them. Okay, so that was the first example. So let me go to a second example here. This one is a bit less dramatic. This one isn't as one-sided, I guess you could say. So in this one, I was playing a friend of mine. This was actually an hour-long game. So we can just skip to the position here. So very similar to last game, I am now up a pawn. I am winning by a slight amount here. And the last move here, my opponent's king was also vulnerable. And so they play queen back to g7. And in this position, you have to have a good think here. You have to think, well, white is up material. Black's king is a bit more exposed than white's. White's is fairly well protected here, even though the g-pawn is pushed. So what should we actually be doing here? Now, unlike the other position, this isn't like a +6, we're less than 1 pawn advantage, we're only 0.9 according to the engine. Now, in the game, to no surprise, I'm sure, people are catching on to the pattern here, I thought, well, I'm up a pawn, I'll trade queens. And this is okay, and I actually did winning this game, so my technique was okay enough. But it's a very small advantage, and I have to convert the entire rest of the game. It's not going to be easy. Now, what I should have done is, instead of trading queens, whose king is more exposed? Well, we already answered that. It's black's. And in this case, would I prefer to keep the strongest attacker on the board? Well, the strongest potential attacker is the queen. And yes, I would. I would like that piece for attacking. And so much stronger is to just move my queen away. Queen to h3, I think, is a more practical choice that's probably better. Now, when the engine runs a bit, if you let it run deeper, it actually says this is about the same exact evaluation as taking on g7. It's between like 0.85 and 0.9 for both of these. And if you let it run, it fluctuates between, they're like identical down to the semi-pawn. So, although in this case it wasn't like a huge blunder to trade queens when I'm up material, I think in practical play, their king is more exposed, it makes more sense for me to keep attackers on the board, even though I'm up by a slight amount of material. So that was, kind of an extension to what we were looking at. Now, I'm going to show one last example, and this one is a very simplistic example, but I think it's very powerful to show this concept, because this pattern comes up a lot. So in this position here, the very start of the game, of course, this is very common, but joking aside, we're only 4 moves in, we'll get to this opening. So we play d4, d6, c4, and then e5 is a bit unorthodox. This is known as the English rat defense. And it's very strange, this opening, if you've never encountered this. Because the natural thing is, like, if you've never seen this opening before, you're very tempted to just say, well, can't I just trade pawns and then trade queens? Like, this has to be good, right? Black has lost castling rights. Everything else is equal. Of course, white should be good. Well, that's kind of the trap of this opening. If we were to look at this, I'll flip the board, have this from black's perspective. What exactly does each side have here? This looks pretty much equal. And, black is basically traded down to equality already. White has nothing. And you could argue, well, yeah, black has lost castling rights. And although that's true superficially, what's the problem with that? Because normally the problem is if you've lost your castling rights and your king is stuck in the center, the reason that's a problem is because your opponent can put a lot of pressure on your king in the center. And how do they put pressure? Well, they're very strong pieces. Specifically, they're attacking pieces, like their queen. Well, how many pieces does white have developed here? All their minor pieces are on the back rank, their queen is traded off, and of course their other heavy pieces, the rooks, are still stuck in the corners. White has 0 pieces developed, and so there is 0 problem that the king is in the center. And the fact that we've traded queens, one could also argue the black's king is actually really well placed here. Because in the endgame, the king usually wants to be in the center. They want to play an active role in the fight. And the king is already here. So we've actually saved time by not castling. Black is completely fine here. And this is a very, startling thing for a lot of players, because it's not just this opening. There's other openings too, where one side wants to, trade and then to get like this queen trade on an open file. Very common idea. And sometimes it's justifiable to get queens off and ruin your opponent's castling rights. Absolutely. But you have to think twice. You can't just say, well, I'll ruin their castling rights and go from there. Because here, this is pretty much equal. And in fact, I'd even argue it's a little worse than that. Because in this case, I think black might even be slightly better. If we look at the evaluation for the quick analysis, it's plus 0.2. So it says white is smidge better. But if you let this run deeper, it actually bounces between negative 0.05 and plus 0.2, which means that on the far down end, the computer actually thinks black is slightly better. And if we look in practical play, if someone were to fall into this position, it's even worse. And so I'll take it to the opening explorer here, the chess.com database. Let's see if I can enlarge the screen a bit here. And so you can see the statistics from this exact position. If we were to trade down here, this is very scary. Look, I know it's a small sample size with games, but just look how good black scores here. Knight c3 is the most common move for white here. Black scores 50% from this position. Knight f3, they score 55. Look at white's winning chances. Very low in practical play. And so, although this might be objectively equal, I think from a psychological edge, white thinks that they've gained something by, ruining black's castling rates. But in reality, I think black has a lot of play here. and white doesn't really understand the danger of their position because black already has equality. And, black is a very logical plan here. They're going to keep getting developed with their minor pieces. Their king is already optimally placed in the center. This is, it's a chess fight. This battle is going to just get started. Don't think that just because the queens are off, you've simplified a bunch. And especially if your opponent is a higher rated player, like let's say white was a lower rated player and they just traded their queen because they don't think they can use their queen as well as their opponent, they're in for a surprise here because, black has already got equality. They've got a really good winning percentage from this position, and maybe they even know this position better than, the person who traded into it, so that's a very scary thought if you're on the white side. But to learn these things, it's a bit counterintuitive because you want to simplify, especially if you're playing a strong player, but that's not necessarily the case. So what you really have to do is look objectively and very concretely and go, is trading good for me in this position? Now, in the positions we were showing earlier, maybe if the enemy king wasn't so exposed, or maybe if there were other factors in the position, then yes, maybe trading would be valid and would have some merit in that position. But in the positions that I showed, it made more sense to keep attackers on the board. And if you only trade 100% of the time when you're up material, you're going to be giving away huge chunks of your advantage. And that is something that has held me back for at least a year, like I said, maybe more. But eventually I did learn it, and I've gotten stronger because of it. And now, because you have watched this chess video, now you are much stronger. You have saved yourself a year. Congratulations. I'm legitimately happy for you that you don't have to suffer the same ups and downs that I did. So I hope this video was useful to everyone, and I will see you in the next chess video.